Think about the biggest regrets you've ever had. Most of them weren't caused by a hurricane, they were caused by a voice. One that made the wrong thing sound normal. A voice that made the risky thing feel safe. The evil thing feel justified, and when you look back, you can almost trace it. The way you may have been coached, the way your emotions felt pressed, the way the lines you thought you'd never cross were suddenly easy to cross. So today, I want to give you a tiny proverb that creates a holy pause in your mind. In 1994, in Rwanda, one of the most sobering examples of a voice shaping a nation wasn't a speech from a podium. It was from radio broadcasts. Before social media, there was radio, and one voice could reach a whole nation. And when that voice said, "Go after these people, they are the problem," it gave its listeners a cult-like identity. It pushed messaging that portrayed a targeted group as subhuman, triggering its listeners with fear and anger. Those messages were never intended to reach people through intellect. Those messages were intended to reach people through their emotions. Manipulators often use propaganda this way to get past the moral resistance normal people have against involving themselves in crimes and anti-moral activities. A literal genocide unfolded over the next 100 days, from April to July 1994, a terrifying reminder of how quickly group thinking can push people into mass violence. The messaging normalized violence as a civic duty, making non-participation feel like betrayal, and participation feel like belonging. Some voices don't love you, they use you. People followed instructions from the Rwandan hate radio because the advice sounded like justice, but it produced division, the loss of so much life, and grief. And that's where the tiny metacognitive proverb I teased earlier comes in. 4 words: advice reveals the advisor. And you can often see a voice's true nature by the fruit it leaves behind. When a voice repeatedly trains people to fear, dehumanize, and join harm, it reveals the advisor's character: a control fixation, hatred, and a thirst for power, not love or truth. Advice reveals the advisor. This tiny proverb will reveal the character of all the people around you, from the most righteous to the most wicked. Advice is never neutral. It contains the character of the person giving it. The serpent's advice back in the garden asked Eve to challenge God and ignore consequences, and not so coincidentally, that same voice had already practiced challenging God, had already ignored the consequences in the highest place imaginable, at the right hand of God's throne room. And then he went into the garden, whispering, "Do like I did, Eve. Aim for the same status as God." Advice reveals the advisor, the same way that manipulation reveals the manipulator. It's basically a person asking you to do what they would do. In his book, Mein Kampf, a lot of Adolf Hitler's advice reeked of and revealed characteristics of deception, manipulation, a trigger focus, moral corruption, and a control fixation. Case in point, in that book, Hitler says, "Aim at emotions, not intellect." Hitler said that because, like so many nefarious and satanic people through history, Hitler himself aimed at people's emotions, not their intellect. Hitler's advice reveals a mindset that I call a trigger focus. A trigger focus is when someone deliberately aims at another person's emotions, not to heal them, but to use them. It's a mark of manipulation. If I can get you upset, I can eventually get you to do what I want. Now, most of us don't fixate on this knowledge or use it to our advantage, but manipulators do. Every time that Hitler and the Nazis overrode a new follower's intellect by targeting their emotions, they celebrated. We are so slick. Understand that when any voice tries to make you feel your way into doing something that goes against what you know is right, that voice has revealed itself as a manipulator. Last time, we talked about being just, even when the crowd is loud, linking hands with the court against the crowd. Because the crowd doesn't want truth, it wants a target. The crowd doesn't want due process. It craves a dopamine hit. It doesn't care about patience or justice. It's entertained by punishment. Now watch what happens in John chapter 8. A woman is dragged into the middle of a street, into the middle of public outrage, not a private correction or careful moment of truth, but a public humiliation. She's not even treated like a person anymore, just an object of condemnation. And the crowd comes fully armed, with a Bible verse in hand, religious leaders in holy robes, and a preordained verdict. They're loud, confident, and superficially moral. They say, Moses says that she should be stoned. And here's the terrifying part. The crowd is not only trying to punish her, they're actually trying to trap and trick our Savior by provoking him. So here Christ stands in the middle of the street, between a human being and a mob, between justice and performance. And what does Jesus do? Does he match their volume? Join in on all the outrage? Get swept into a truth that is trending? No. Christ does something crowds hate. He slows the moment down. He stoops quietly and silently writes letters into the sand. He creates a pause, and that pause is everything. Because a pause can turn a mob right back into individuals. A pause can force people to think again. A pause can bring the court back into a crowd moment. Then Jesus stands up and says one sentence that is so full of both justice and mercy that it still floors us today. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. That is Jesus dismantling public condemnation as entertainment. He's basically saying, if you want justice, bring truth, but also bring integrity and clean hands. That's something the "we are so slick" crowd doesn't bring to the table. Truth, integrity, and clean hands. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Advice reveals the advisor. You can tell whether a leader has a high moral character or a low moral character by what they tell people to do when the world gets hot. In Birmingham, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was facing a system of racial oppression that had badges, hoses, dogs, and the law behind it. And Dr. King's advice wasn't, let's make them hurt. It was, let's stay disciplined while we suffer and let the injustice reveal itself in the light. That advice revealed the advisor. Dr. King believed in true justice. He knew that true justice doesn't need your cruelty, because cruelty is what the unjust use. Advice reveals the advisor. Some voices try to bypass your discernment by turning your emotions way up. One tool you can use to recover from that is metacognition. Metacognition is viewed by neuroscientists as the highest form of intelligence. It's the ability to think about thinking, and this tiny four-word proverb is designed to aid you in a metacognitive process. When you know that advice reveals the advisor, you begin to realize how important it is to pause and examine what a voice is doing to you. It's about gaining awareness of what's going on inside of you while someone or something is trying to influence you. It's when you notice, my emotions are being pulled, my mind is rushing, my rationality is disintegrating. And here's why that pause matters. Manipulation requires speed and intense emotions. The serpent strategy in Genesis isn't, here's a week-long, deep and spiritually dense, accurate theological dissertation about eating the fruit. It was just a quick frame that bent Eve's emotions and perceptions. That's why the metacognitive pause of this proverb is holy. It breaks the spells cast by manipulators. There are hundreds of thousands of voices that you will encounter over the course of your lifetime. So many voices would like to gain prominence and leave their fingerprints on your character. Since advice reveals the advisor, use the metacognitive pause. Before you obey a voice, identify the character behind it. I encourage you to join me as we practice using this metacognitive pause together. Advice reveals the advisor, so pay attention to what their advice is and discern what it says about them. Someone advising you to make peace with someone else is probably a peacemaker, almost by definition. Someone advising you to think critically is probably a critical thinker. Why else would they have critical thinking on the brain? Someone advising you to serve others probably serves others. Isn't that what happened with Christ? He advised his disciples to serve others and then washed their feet at the Last Supper. Someone advising you to honor your commitments is probably faithful. Someone advising you to pray first is probably prayerful themselves. Maybe even a prayer warrior. Someone advising you to give generously probably lives with open hands. Someone advising you to secretly abuse someone else is probably secretly abusive. Someone advising you to support trial by social media probably values outrage overriding your discernment. Someone advising you to trigger another person's emotions using key words probably has a trigger focus. Someone advising you to be passive-aggressive towards someone else is revealing that they want conflict without accountability and control without honesty. Is that a voice you can trust? What about a person who says, that person is crazy. Now join me in a strategy against them that is likely to make them seem crazy? It's red flag city for any clown that does the last three things. But someone who does this specifically, it's a giant red flag. I label them first, then I push them until they look like my label. That's a manipulator. That's a liar. That's a fraud who fits the Darvo reactive abuse behavior pattern. Darvo, remember, stands for deny, attack, and reverse the roles of victim and offender. So the next time a voice says, can you please try to harass someone for me? I know my strategy has been failing for years, but actually, failure over a number of years is a sign of the highest intelligence. I know doxing is criminally punishable by state and federal law, but actually, criminality is a sign of the highest intelligence. I know trial by social media is fundamentally unjust, but actually, injustice is a sign of the highest intelligence. You could tell them, I like your personality. We are so slick. Or you can tell them, advice reveals the advisor. And I choose to listen to voices that align with the values of my Lord and Savior. Your voice has not been one of them. So no,